Olá, bom dia a todos. Eu nunca sei esse horário, se eu digo bom dia ou boa tarde. A minha referência é o almoço. Como eu não almocei, então bom dia a todos. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to start this grand round from Hospital Moinhos de Vento. And I switched to English because I have a pleasure to welcome Professor Robert Giuliano, Professor of Medicine, the Harvard School of Medical School, and Senior Investigator of the TIMI Study Group at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Thank you very much for being here with us. Probably you all know his name from international research, articles, and important studies that he not only participate, but organize and create for us. He's a leading in the cardiovascular clinical research, especially in acute coronary syndrome, lipid management, and antithrombotic therapy. He has been the leading investigators of several landmarks randomized trials, such as the IMPROVE trial. I participate in the IMPROVE trial, Professor Robert, Engage, AF, TIMI 48 for a year, and several others. But it's really important, and maybe the reason that he's here is beyond his research career. He's also a clinician, an educator, and a mentor for several young investigators and physicians. And he's always concerned with mentoring next generations of cardiologists. And in this context, he was, and he is still, a companion and a mentor for Andrea Zimmer, that is today with us and head of our academic research organization. And today we'd like to share with you some aspects that we call the future of cardiovascular disease, but looking specific at the research, the trajectory of Professor Robert, how he sees the field of cardiovascular disease in the future. And I'd like to ask you all to join me to welcome Professor Robert. And I would like to invite Andrea Zimmerman, the head do ARO, our academic research organization, the MOVE, and I have to remember the MOVE Center, and Eduardo Dietz, the coordinator of the Institute of Research Institute here at Hospital Moinhos de Vento. Thank you very much. I know we have Professor and Dr. Nazi, our CMO, here with us. He's always welcome to join us, but as far as I understood, he'd like to stay listening to our conversation. So thank you, Nazi, to being with us today. So I guess it's up to you. I will sit. Okay?
Yeah, I guess I can open. So to me, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have Dr. Giuliano here. He was my primary mentor at the TIMI study group. And as Carisi said, he has not only led several practice-changing trials in cardiology and in medicine today. If any one of you guys uses ezetimibe, that's because of one of his trials. If any one of you guys uses edoxaban, uses evolocumab, that all traces back to one of his trials. So he's somebody who not only knows how to apply the evidence, but he actually creates the evidence. And having him here with us today, it's a true honor. And more than that, he really looked at training the next generation of physician scientists. We would be at TIMI, at 10 p.m. and he would be going through my papers, and he is extremely dedicated at training the next generation. And the fact that he's here today is also a testament to that. So it's truly an honor to have him here. I guess I'll do the first question and kick this off by asking you, Dr. Giuliano, how was your career trajectory? Like, how did you get to this point where you are this, world-renowned physician and researcher, but it wasn't always like that. How did you get to where you are today? So tell us a little bit about this path.
No, well, thank you very much, Andre, and thank you for the invitation to come and making the arrangements here today. A couple of thoughts. One of the things is is to find the right mentor. And for me, I was very fortunate to have an invitation to come to work with the TIMI study group under the direction of Eugene Braunwald. And Dr. Braunwald, I think I don't need to introduce to you, right? I'll just point out, he turned 96 this August. He is still calling me more than once a week to correct my papers and my grammar. So at that level of detail at age 96, you know, and even before Dr. Braunwald, I was fortunate to interact, well, as my chief of the cardiology when I was a fellow with Valentin Fuster, who pointed me towards Dr. Braunwald. So, you know, I think one of the things we discussed, because we discussed this question, you know, how do you get started on such a career? And Dr. Braunwald, and this is an analogy maybe older people in the crowd may remember, but when you go on the merry-go-round, it used to be the very old rides. Every once in a while, there would be this gold hoop that would come out. And the idea was that you would touch it. And that would be, you know, you would win a prize then. But it would come in and out. And what Dr. Braunwald said to me very early and to the group is, when you're on the merry-go-round of your career or your life, you need to recognize when the gold hoop is in front of you and when you have the opportunity to grab it. And so that always stuck with me, that I was given these tremendous opportunities and that it was my chance to really move my career forward. And so that's kind of the early part, that I recognized this opportunity to come as a research fellow and to work with a tremendous organization and, you know, to focus, try to get the most out of the opportunity, and eventually then to be asked to join the group as a member for the long term. So I think for the young people in the audience, you know, try different things. Yes, some things I've done have failed miserably, you know, but you know, you don't always know. You don't have the crystal ball. And when you see an excellent opportunity, then grab for it and work very hard for that goal. Later in my career then, and so for people of my hair color, will appreciate this. You know, I even remember talking to my chief of cardiology to say, now that I made a professor at Harvard, which I never thought would be possible, right? I did not get accepted to Harvard as an undergraduate school, you know? So I went to a different college, which turned out to be fine, but to be then professor of Harvard was something I never imagined. And I said to my chief, this was now 2019, before COVID, I said, so what do you do now that you're a professor at Harvard? Harvard has this rule in the books that once you make professor, you can't be fired. There was even 150 years ago a professor at Harvard who killed somebody, who was a murderer. He went to jail, but he stayed professor at Harvard because you can't get rid of it. It's written in the rules. So, yeah. So I asked him. He said, "Well, look at your career. You've had, you know, great success, but a lot of that was because of the work that mentors for you put into developing your career and giving opportunities." And so really have made that a focus of my career now the last 5-6 years, to work with younger people. And it's very rewarding. And I looked back just recently at papers I've written since 2020. And I think, I don't remember the exact number, but say there was 96 or some large number. I'm the first author on one paper, one review article, and I think an invitation to be to write a commentary. So the other 93 papers over the last 5-6 years, I have worked to support junior people, and I'm somewhere in the end, or it doesn't matter so much anymore. So I think those are my experience and my advice if you're earlier in the career or if you're later in the career. That's served me well, and I hope you know, others will find that useful.
I'd like just to say that people, you are welcome to make questions. So this could be an informal talk. Então, perguntem, if you don't feel comfortable speaking in English, nós traduzimos. Então, vamos lá to enjoy what Professor Robert is telling us. And talking about the trajectory, what's your day look like?
Yeah.
We are just talking about you were on call, ICU, and sometimes people think that you don't do clinics and this kind of thing.
No, that's a good point. I mean, I think my philosophy here has been that you still need to see patients, and you need to take care of patients, and it may not be the most difficult or challenging aspect, and we're not paid very much for that aspect of our careers in U.S. hospitals unless you're doing procedures, and I don't do procedures. I was born with two left hands, but I think a good mind. So I teach my brother. I have a younger brother who's an interventionalist, and he says, he realized, he says, no, I'm the gorilla. I'm not smart, but I know how to use hands. So we have that even within our family. But so I still see patients in clinic at least one day a week, and I still attend in the cardiac intensive care unit. That's kind of been my focus. I used to have also the, if you call it step down unit, the general cardiology floor. But then I really enjoyed the intensive care part. And that's important for me to just be reminded about what are the practical challenges, what are the needs, the unmet needs when we're seeing our patients. And I think it gives some credibility to also, when I say, these are the challenges with lipid lowering, half the U.S. thinks statins are bad and don't want to take it. And so, we have to, it's part of this is education, and part is to find other solutions to lower the LDL. So I think that part's important. I will say that others in our group have a variable amount of clinical time. Maybe half does clinic, but I think that clinic is still an important part. But everybody in our group of the cardiologists all have a clinical presence in the hospital, either in the cardiac intensive care or the general ward, and many. So I think that part of your career, I would advise you to keep some of it, but also I tell the younger people, keep it at the minimum, because you can always add more as you go on. It's hard to subtract, right? It's hard to, what are you going to do? Say you have a clinic now only once a month, and then what happens to the other 3/4 of your patients, So you can always build more, but maybe start and keep that foundation of the clinic so that you, have a practical understanding of what's going on in your research career.
Yeah, I think
Here, I imagine you have the opposite problem. You have such a high clinical burden. It's hard to find the research. Well, I think this is where, the research groups and the AROs are very important. And we were lucky when Dr. Bromwell came to the Brigham in 1972. He said, this is going to be an institution of excellence for all types of people in cardiology. Those who just want to see patients, that's fine. We have a spot for you. Those who want to do only research, that's fine. But you have to find a way to make money then, because we can't we can't just pay you and you don't bring money in. And so writing grants is an important part of that career. But what was unique, I think, is he also saw this middle ground, this opportunity for people who want to do what we call at Harvard the triple threat. So the three things would be clinical practice, research, and education. And so he made it possible for that path to exist.
I think I really enjoyed the analogy of the golden hoop.
Yeah.
That is really nice. But to contextualize, our hospital is now 98 years old, and traditionally it has been a hospital in which we take pride of providing a good health care to our patients. But it hasn't been, I think, for the last 5 or so years that it has pivoted towards research. And our job now is to make sure that there are enough golden hoops for people to touch. So, what would be your advice for us, since you, Timmy, and well, everyone else in your institution has already trailblazed this field? So, what can we do to make our environment more suitable for research?
Yeah. Well, this is a challenge when you're, I think, modifying maybe perhaps the aim, right? Initially set up 98 years ago to care for patients, right? And I think most all hospitals 100 years ago were doing that. The Brigham's a bit older, but still had the same birth and beginning. I mean, what I have seen work is a model that where you have different groups that experiment and try different things, and you have to, even in your personal life, it's not like I'm 100% committed just to what goes on in my hospital. I do a lot of collaborations with other groups throughout the country and throughout the world. And some of those are more successful than others. And some of them lead to success, not only scientifically, but also financially, So I think it's, if you think of a successful business, or even at a greater level, what's made some countries more successful than others, part of it is the ability to diversify, try different things. Some things fail, some things succeed, and then learn from one another and choose a course that will give you the highest chance of progressing to the next stage. So I think, there'll be trials or ideas that we take on, and then they don't lead anywhere. But the future is uncertain, so you don't know. And if you don't try something, if you're that conservative, you will progress at a very slow rate, or even worse.
We are in this very unique point in our institution's history where, like Eduardo said, for decades we were basically providing healthcare to patients, but now also through the vision of the hospital leadership, we are pivoting towards this triple threat you mentioned. So we started the college, hopefully soon the medical school. We now have a lot of research going on, plus the actual healthcare. So this will enable us to actually provide all these golden hoops, all these options for people who identify more with one angle or the other. The question I have is, I actually know this answer, but I wanted you to describe to these people, how does your typical day look like? Because here you're saying that you have the education aspect, you have the patient care, you have the research, you're doing all of this. What is your typical day? What do you do? You can even mention the Peloton if you'd like.
Yeah.
He's like this record Peloton bicycle guy.
Right. Maybe within my age group. Right? Well, it definitely varies throughout the week because, as I mentioned, I'm doing different things. So when I'm not on the clinical service, which is the majority of the weeks, I think now it's only 4 weeks total where I'm in the cardiac intensive care. Part of that is to allow the group to expand and to allow younger people to also be involved. But let's say on a Monday, we have our scientific meeting of the TIMI study group that lasts a couple hours. I then have to drive to my clinic, and the rest of Monday afternoon, I'm all in clinic. Then when I'm home from clinic is my time for research in the evening. And I'm lucky because, number one, I have the best wife in the world, and she's understanding. And now that she's an author and she writes, we have study hall. I don't know if that's the same concept here when you're in school. We would have you you have a time where you're not in a class, but you just study like one period. Yeah, we call it study hall. So she may be working on her books and poetry, and I will be going through kind of the day's work. So that Monday is a very busy day, a long day for me. I make the Peloton first thing in the morning because otherwise it's not possible. But then the rest of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, unless I am in one of those 4 weeks on the CCU, it's split, but mostly research and then some routine patient care issues that you all know well. You have to return phone calls. You have to review lab tests and results. And I always write whenever I get a lab test or result of a study. I always write a personal letter to the patient because they don't understand what this means. And now in the US, everybody immediately gets access to their results. So I tell them, don't call me, immediately when you get the result that the chloride is 97. Trust me, I review them every day and I'll get back to you. So I'm doing that for a couple hours of the day, but the rest of the day is either in meetings related to research or meeting with the younger investigators, or reading papers, reviewing, writing papers. And that is most of the rest of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We have, because just the cycle of the trials I've been involved in now, 3 very active trials. 2 will be presented at the American Heart Association as late breakers. We hope they'll both be published in the New England Journal online at the same time. We'll see. And then a 3rd trial that I have that is ongoing and so requires a lot of work day to day. But I mean, I'm very lucky that 4 out of my 5 weekdays are free to mainly focus on research and then the bit of patient care that we all have to do. Because, I mean, in a very important part of my role is to make sure I'm taking good care of these patients, right? They're really dependent on us. I will say that many nights I'm working and weekends I also work, but not round the clock crazy, although my wife might tell you a different story. But I mean, I love what I do, so I'm very happy to be able to spend that time. And that's why Andre and I often spend hours into the evening. It's quiet then, the patients can't bother you as much, and we can focus and be productive.
So that's very interesting. And young people that is hearing, it's not just to be a researcher and work from 9 to 5 as people think. Quite the opposite. You work a lot and sometimes off hours. I'm not so sure if people would like to ask Robert some questions about this, because I would like to jump a little bit on the research itself, on the aspects of the clinical trials. We've been following all the studies, acute coronary syndrome, lipid especially, and antithrombotic. Could you say a little bit about all the perspective, how these studies, the ideas come along? It's yours ideas or someone else propose? How it works usually?
No, that's a good point. I mean, that's why I think it is important to have a foot into the clinical practice, some understanding of what's going on when we're taking care of patients, because many of the ideas come from clinical practice. And I'll be frank, we work very closely with partners in industry, and I consider many of them my friends and colleagues, and I've learned from them. It's a different part of the picture, right? Because they are working for a company, they obviously have a different primary goal, but many of them are scientists, researchers, many of them worked in academics, and even some from our group occasionally move to work with industry. So there's 2 sides of the same coin. I think that's that part of having a relationship with practice and with industry is important, because it's the real world for trials, right? We can't do these studies without support from either the government or industry. more than a decade ago, we completed a large trial with an anticoagulant. I don't know because I never saw the money and the numbers, but I had heard that that was a trial that cost more than $1 billion US. Yeah. And so, you know, if I'm involved in a study that much of an investment, then you want to work hard and focus, and you need to understand what are the realities from the perspective of the company who's funding it, from what's happening in each of the countries. We were, I think, in that trial in 48 countries around the world. It was a lot of travel, but luckily, you know, not just me. One of the fellows working with me, I would tease him that his office was a big jumbo jet plane because he was going all over the world to direct the trial. So I think that some of the ideas come from the clinical practice. Some come, frankly, from companies who have in their research pipeline found something very interesting. You know, that here's a drug that may have been developed or initially started in one field, and now we see that it does something interesting in cardiology. We'd like to test it. A lot of this starts with the basic research. I think the PCSK9 inhibitor story is one of the great successes of modern cardiology. Here was, you know, researchers in Europe and in Utah in the US and in Dallas finding a third locus that resulted in familial hypercholesterolemia, you know, the PCSK9 variants, that then as a technology for drug development moved from a more chance or basis on organic chemistry to, oh, we can design a monoclonal antibody that handles this genetic variant that's causing hypercholesterolemia. So, you know, that was a collaboration between the scientists and companies who realized an opportunity, and then trialists who developed the trials and did the studies. I mean, for me, I was fortunate because I remember going to hear, before the drug was even first given to humans, the data in monkeys and in chimps that showed a profound reduction in LDL that lasted for several months. And it's like, well, you have to continue along this path. I mean, this is has huge potential. And that went very rapidly. That was maybe late 2000s, 2008, 2009. Studies in man followed within a year. You know, phase 2 trial I was involved in was 2012, 2013. And then drugs are approved in 2015, 2016. So extremely rapid development of PCSK9 inhibitors, which have helped so many patients. And now as the prices come down and we'll have oral drugs, it will be, I think, a standard therapy in lipid lowering.
Just to follow up on this question, because I was talking with Andre and I asked him, he has been in TIMI for how long exactly? And he said, well, a long time. And then I was wondering.
Not as long as Dr. Braunwald.
Yeah. And then I was wondering, how did this relationship with the industry came to be?
No, that's a good question. So the history of the TIMI trials dates back now a little over 40 years, and it's an interesting path. So Dr. Braunwald, I think it was age 36, had to be the youngest person ever, was named to the director of the NIH, the National Institute of Health in the US, the chief of cardiology. I think at 36 I was still a fellow, but now he's like the top level cardiologist, working, yes, with government funding, but the NIH does all the trials that were, you know, funded by the government that couldn't be done otherwise. And through that relationship, then when he left then and was built a medical school or helped found a medical school in San Diego, and then came to the Brigham in 72, he had a network of people that he knew and investigators, and started the first TIMI trial, which was not funded by industry, was funded by the government. And as he says, whenever you're the first, it's not called TIMI 1. It was just the TIMI trial, right? World War I didn't get a 1 until World War II came along. So, and he had a network of people that he trained or had worked with at the NIH who all contributed patients. And TIMI 1, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, was the first study that compared TPA, a new thrombolytic, with streptokinase, looking at arterial patency in acute MI. So it was a different trial, several hundred patients. You didn't need 10,000 patients to show TPA opened arteries faster and at a higher rate than streptokinase. And that also led to other early TIMI trials, TIMI 2 and TIMI 3, that were in a similar area with lytics or anticoagulants. But ultimately, companies then developing new therapies said, this is a great way to quickly study a new drug, whether in the earlier trials were with various types of anticoagulants and then antiplatelets and then lipid lowering, and then we branched out beyond acute coronary syndrome, and it just grew very quickly from there. But not all our trials are supported by industry. The majority are. Sometimes it's other grants. But you know, this is a very expensive endeavor to develop a drug. And I told you about the extreme example. But it's a collaboration, often with industry, but sometimes with the government or other philanthropic institutions. Yeah.
Well, so first, guys, please, this is supposed to be a conversation. If anyone has any questions, just shoot a hand up, and I'll also check online if someone asks a question. Em português ou em inglês, podem fazer a pergunta que a gente traduz sem problemas. Let me follow up with this issue with industry, because people are very weary of, the different incentives involved. As academics, we are looking at running the best possible trial, but we know the companies have their own incentives. How does this work? But we also know to do these big trials, approve new drugs, you need the companies. And I've heard a lot of people are a little wary about this kind of relationship. How does that work? How is your relationship with industry, the relationship between the academic research organization, the companies, the contract research organization, and how does that factor into the trial?
Right. No, this is an important question, and it's a delicate area in these kind of collaborations. Obviously, companies have some kind of governing board, and then they look at the bottom line, which is their profits and their ability to grow. And in academia, it's completely different. I mean, we are interested in the science and getting to the truth and trying to develop therapies to improve healthcare. And sometimes these two groups, butt heads. And we've been. I think it's important to have a collaborative nature that allows you to hear what companies are saying and what their priorities are, and for them to understand, there are certain things that we have to have. And it is helpful that Harvard is fairly restrictive about things. So, anybody's name who's on the paper has to have made a contribution, has to have read and approved the papers. We don't just put people's names on there, for example, even simple things like that. But also when we are designing the trial, we have always insisted that our group writes the draft. And of course, the companies can comment on that and we come to agreements. And there are times where we either have to threaten to walk away or, to say that this isn't going to work. But I have to say, within a company, there'll be lots of different groups and people with different motivations, right? Like the governing board, of course, they're looking at one thing, but the physician scientists there, some of them trained at our institution or other excellent institutions. And so working with the scientists and the physicians it's almost always been a very good experience with us. I mean, you have seen some of that too. And these are people who I've developed long-standing relationships with and friendships. And just as I was boarding the flight, one of my colleagues from a trial from 15 years ago, his daughter is moving to Boston and said, do I know a realtor? What areas of Boston should they live in? I mean, these are friends. Like I mean, yes, they work for a company, but sometimes they're as frustrated within the company as we can be with them. So that has been not such a major problem, I would say. They are, if you're particularly those who are your peers working in a company, have training. They've done medical research. They understand the key issues. Sometimes they're limited in what they can do, and so then you have to draw lines. But I think that has gone a lot more smoothly than I would have projected. I mean, you have seen this too, Andre, at the Timmy Group.
Yeah, I'll have to say that the rigor around these big industry-funded trials is just so huge that you don't have a lot of leeway to change stuff, even if you want to, right? You do the statistical analysis plan even before you start recruiting your patients. Sometimes you even have the statistical code written out before you start recruiting the first patient. So it's all designed to be in a way that you can't really manipulate stuff. And to be honest, now I also started realizing the bias that creeps into academic studies as well, especially because then you don't have all this formal auditing. And yes, people won't have the financial conflicts of interest, but you will have the intellectual conflicts of interest, which sometimes is even stronger. You're very committed to a certain idea. If the results don't really show that, you can try to manipulate that in some way. And if you don't have the regulatory agencies looking at it, maybe people feel that they can manipulate it a little bit more. So it kind of changed my perception a little bit around these big industry funded trials. I now put, after being at the Timmy study group and having this relationship with pharma, I actually trust these big industry funded trials more, just in a way that there's a lot of people looking at this and you can't really change stuff in the middle of the way. But of course, these companies have their own incentives and you have to factor that in as well with ours.
No, it's a good point. And I remember Dr. Bromwell saying to me early in my career, he says, of course, industry has their own bias and they're trying to be profitable and grow, but there are all these rules and regulations and checks that are ongoing. So you have to write a protocol, stick with it. You can't change without formally going through a review process. And these things are fairly transparent. He says, although you may think that companies could change things in a way or shift or do things, he says, actually, I've seen more of a problem in academics where people have this, work very hard and may want to advance their career, and then there's fraud, or people make up data, or so he told me, and it was shocking when I heard that. He said that's actually less closely observed than what's going on in the relationship between companies and research, which is, in the U.S., every trial that is important that's going to lead to a new indication gets reviewed by the Food and Drug Administration, and they go through every details, and they ask for truckloads, literally, of information to be sent and reviewed by a large organization. And that's why it takes almost a year from the end of a trial to when it's approved. A year would be short. That they're very closely looked at. So I have a greater appreciation that we're all humans and that there are different motivations for individuals, and that we in academics have to also have a very high standard, and that I have to be careful and precise and fair In industry, of course, they have different motivations, but they're watched very closely.
I think just to follow up, there is a third part of this equation, which is that we cannot overstate the importance of regulatory agencies in this matter. Because if you have countries with serious regulatory agencies, I do clinical research, I recruit patients for these trials. It is very time consuming, and it is watched closely by several people. We are subject to audits from local agencies, from international agencies. So these studies, they are really, really, really closely monitored. And when we have a patient with an event, for instance, it is very common for us to be swamped with queries and to be asked to provide documents. So it is different from the academic study, and not because there is more a bigger interest in the industry field. It's because regulatory agencies are really, really demanding it.
This is a great point. So, I mean, if you think of, say, a basic scientist who's in a lab and doing whatever assay and pipetting this and that, and they report their results, the equivalent would be, for a clinical trial, what if you had an independent organization, we call them contract research organizations or CROs, who came to the lab periodically and checked your measurements and checked your notebook, for the results. And if you had an important finding, then they went in great detail and they asked you questions, and you had to fill out forms that were agreed upon beforehand to collect the data. That doesn't happen, right, in a basic science lab. But in a clinical trial, there's the company, and then there's the academic group in our model, but there's often this independent CRO, the contract research organization, who's responsible for the accuracy of the reporting of the data. And then they're even overseen by reviews at either periodically or at the end of the trial from the government, from the FDA. So there's a lot of scrutiny that goes into these clinical trials. And it's not to say that we don't have people who have either not told the truth, lied outright, or made up patients. I like to tell the story about one of my trials where we had a center in India that enrolled 50-some patients, and we were also looking at ST segments and resolution after therapy, and we started to look, and the EKGs all had the same QT interval. And then, the PR interval's the same too, and the heart rate's the same. And they had good use of a photocopier and submitted the same ECG 52 times, but changed the name, the ID number at the top. That happens. That happens in the U.S. We had a U.S. hospital that happens in Europe. That's happened and famous trials where the data just are out of line. But I think it's pretty hard these days, I think, to fabricate at that level and not get caught, right? Because there are multiple pairs of eyes, and the statisticians have gotten smart, right? If they know if the results are too perfect, or no data are missing, or no data are at extremes, that's a little bit funny, and so let's review this in detail and send somebody to the site and look through the records, and so that's an important aspect of clinical trials that I think lead to greater rigor and more trustworthy results.
I'll jump in. We have a question from the audience. That's why I'm curious to hear about. It's very interesting. It moves a little bit from this regulatory aspect, but to design and how to conduct studies, maybe the future of clinical trials. So I'll just read. Well written. In recent years, we've seen the emergence of innovative clinical trial designs. Yeah. such as decentralized studies and models with active patients' engagements, alongside with new debate about how to collect this data, how to trust this data. So this is one part. The other one is data transparency and boundaries of blinding. The TIMI study group has been a global benchmark for methodologic rigor, as you were just saying, how to envision balancing this scientific robustness that TIMI provides with these new developments or new approaches, and the growing pushing for innovation and flexibility in trial execution.
No, it's a good question. And I think that, the way we've done trials, or the way trials were done 40 years ago, things have evolved. And they're in part because of, improvements in technology, other ways to do studies, right? So when we were conducting trial studies through the COVID pandemic, for example, well, people weren't traveling back and forth to the hospitals. Or in a recent trial, we had not only COVID, but we had a major land war in Europe. And two of our leading enrolling countries were Russia and the Ukraine. So how do you conduct follow-up visits either during COVID or during a war? How do you even pay Russian centers? Because remember, they were disconnected largely from commerce and the banking system, and borders were closed, right? And so there are these challenges that come up in clinical trials. I call them, meteors from outer space. You can't possibly even have imagined this was going to happen, and they're going to hit you. But luckily, through technology, we have been able to, conduct follow-up visits, say, remotely. It's not ideal, but that is a way that you can collect data from patients. And I think patients entering information, and other ways and to conduct studies, you're seeing being tested, and whether they're as rigorous and will be as widely as accepted as the current model, we'll see. But I don't think every trial has to have a CRO and the exact same level of auditing and data collection. I mean, we've moved. When I started, we had all paper ECRFs, for example. Well, that's ridiculous. So then you have to fax forms or mail them the data. Now it's entirely electronic, right? Is it easier to make mistakes or, not describe the data in as great detail? There are some challenges there, but I think the methodology we use in clinical trials is going to evolve as the technology and aids here help us. No doubt. And I think there's room for other designs. I still believe, though, that the randomized clinical trial, the folks in Oxford say, God's gift to research was a randomized clinical trial, is still the highest level. But that doesn't mean that for different purposes, you could use a different design. I mean, you certainly could.
I agree. I think just to follow up, I think that we will go towards a place in which we will use technology to recruit patients faster, to decrease the money, because at the end of the day, we need to, it's very expensive to do a large trial with that much rigor. And we need to find a sweet spot in which we will have a randomized clinical trial. We can have these other trial types as well, but I think that the randomized clinical trials will remain as the mainstay of our evidence-based pyramid. And we have been, looking towards several research aids to help us in our institution to provide a better, cost effectiveness to our research. So my question would be, what are the major systems and aids that you use at TIMI to better improve this recruitment process?
Yeah, The recruitment process. Yeah, well, that's an interesting one that continues to evolve. We're working in one of our trials that's a challenging one to enroll in patients with atrial fibrillation who are not candidates for anticoagulant. And we're studying a factor 11 inhibitor. Well, that's challenging, right? Because the kind of patients we often see in the office who have atrial fibrillation, and I went through my entire panel, I think all but 4 were on an anticoagulant. And the ones that weren't were, either near death or on dialysis and patients who wouldn't normally qualify for trials. But, we know these patients exist. They're just probably in small numbers in any one person's practice. And so, having a system or an organization where, you can work with doctors at multiple hospitals, but it's a single one enrolling center, and even do this centrally without having to necessarily travel to the center from the patient's perspective or have the doctor be right there in person. That's an example of something that I think, we may incorporate in future trials. It depends on the study. I mean, if it's a study in acute MI, ST elevation MI, well, then that's not going to work, obviously. So, and I think about wearables. Now I not only have a watch, but I have a Whoop, and this thing, it yells at me every time I don't go to bed on time or skipped exercise for the day, right? And so if you want to monitor heart rate or rhythm or even blood pressure, and I checked it, the blood pressure was accurate to 1 millimeter of mercury on this device. I don't even know how you get a blood pressure out of that. Those, I think, advances in technology are going to make certain, be applied to certain trials and make it a lot easier to get accurate information. And yes, of course, I could put this, one of my kids could be wearing it. I could put it on the dog or something like that. But you also don't know when you're collecting some information. If somebody wants to cheat the system, they can do that. And I think a neat thing would be, we always struggle with, are patients actually taking the medications? And there have been some innovations in giving medications in a bottle or of some sort that you can detect when it's opened, and when it's closed. So maybe some insight. Now, they might be opening it and pouring it into the toilet. You don't know, but that's better than, did you take your medicine? How many doses did you miss?
I think the statistician would know if it was the dog's blood pressure.
Yeah.
Oh, Dr. Giuliani, first of all, thank you so much for this unique meeting here in the hospital with your time here with us. My question is about the title of our meeting, The Future of the Health and Cardiovascular Disease. And I would like to listen about your opinion about the new risk factors, like air pollution, like climate change, and also the foods, the agriculture that change actually. How we build the next generation of clinical trials with this approach, the new risk factors that are in this 21st century.
No, thank you for reminding us of the an important aspect of today's program. And I have been working or reviewing work from Singapore, where they're looking exactly at these more novel risk factors. They have a neat name like Smurfless, and I think it means patients who don't have the traditional risk factors, say for myocardial infarction. So their cholesterol is good, they don't have diabetes, their blood pressure is reasonable, and yet still patients are at risk. And so we know that the traditional risk factors maybe explain 2/3 of the risk. It's variable depending on what population you look at. But there are these other factors that continue to be explored and understood that we need to tackle. So I think that's eventually going to get into clinical trials. Some of them may not be answered with a pill or a medication. Some of them will require other fundamental changes. If you talk about like pollution, which is a known risk factor for not only pulmonary disease, but also cardiac diseases. And that's going to require some we call out-of-the-box thinking, because it's not like we're going to randomize people to be exposed to air pollution or not, right? We're going to need to have other clever ways to study and assess that, and then to solve the problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a question from the audience there.
Hello, Professor. First of all, I would like you to to thank you actually for giving us some of your time to be here. My name is Guilherme. I'm a PGY1 internal medical resident, and I have two questions actually. The first one I would like to ask you, looking back now, what do you think was your main characteristic during the early in your career that made it possible for you to grab the golden hoops? And the second one is, if you could give a piece of advice for many of the residents that are present here today, what would it be?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. No, very good questions, and thank you for asking them. So I will tell you that early in my career, I tried to do some research, and things just didn't work out. Even my then chief of cardiology, who I was close to as a resident and respected, and gave me advice for a type of research looking at after heart transplantation, all the nerves are cut. And the question was, when and does the heart re-innervate? Have then connections to sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It's a great question, but it's not a real easy question for a resident who has like one more year left in the program to answer, because the answer was going to be in years, and I had months to do the research. So I don't want you to think that I didn't have things that always succeeded. There were certainly things that I tried that didn't work out, but you have to try several things before you find one that's successful. I think that's one part of my answer is you need to try different things. You need to recognize when something's good. You need to learn to recognize something that's not working out and move on and accept it. I think I've already mentioned that having a mentor is really key earlier in your career. And you can have more than one mentor, and they may change. In the U.S., we tend to train at multiple institutions. I had one during residency, and then during fellowship another, and then during my early research career a third. And that's fine. And I still collaborate and work with all of them, but changed over the years. And the third thing, I think, when I was describing my usual day is, if you really want a dual career in research and clinical practice and academics, a triple threat, so three, it takes a lot of work, right? You have to be willing to work hard. You can't always fit it into the daylight hours, and you have to love that, because it's a commitment to make it work.
Yeah, we got some more questions online. So one of the questions, Bob, is from Isabella, one of our clinical trials fellows.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody deeply involved with several landmark trials, which study do you feel most shaped your perspective on clinical research? And I will follow up with that with a second question that is, after you describe the trial, just leave some clinical pearls about the findings here, because here we also have a general medical audience.
Sure.
So going out of the specific research aspect and also a little bit into the clinical aspect.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, and I've been fortunate to have been involved in so many trials. When I came, I think TIMI 9 was just finishing, and we're now like at TIMI 80, and there's been several A, Bs, and Cs along the way. So I have seen more than 70 trials, not always involved in depth, but maybe the one that to me is most memorable was the trial with the anticoagulant, the DOAC edoxaban, because that was the first one where I really took the leadership role and was involved kind of in all the aspects of the trial. And even though that study ended in 2013, we still meet once a month to go over papers that are written. Andre, you've written some from there. And we're approaching our 100th paper from that one study. And so, you know, being involved at that level, I really got to see what the challenges are, what works, what didn't. We learn from each of our trials, and at our Monday meetings, we share what's working and what's not, so that, you know, if I learned this from an anticoagulant trial, it might apply also to a lipid trial or to a diabetes trial or what have you. So we learned about things that you think would be easy, but how do you find patients who have stopped to study medicine and gone missing, right? How do you search? How do you approach that? How do you determine what's the cause of death in somebody where you have minimal information or there was no autopsy? And how, you know, taking tools that already existed, like the World Health Organization, you know, when they're studying infectious diseases in Africa or in Asia, wherever, they have a very well-designed form where you talk to family members or somebody else and you kind of sort out, okay, did they have this symptom or that? What was the circumstances of death? Where were they found? When were they last seen alive? That help you characterize what might have been the cause of death. So those are kind of things that I learned from that trial that we've now applied to other trials. And I continue to learn from the experiences of my peers who are also doing other studies. And as you know, now we have use of cell phones or online opportunities to collect information. Those kind of lessons that are learned are shared amongst the group. And in your second part of the question,
because here the idea is to talk about research, but also a little bit about cardiovascular science. So just bring it a little bit more into the clinical aspect.
Right.
Any clinical pearls you have, either in anticoagulation, lipids, stuff you want people to take home from that standpoint as well.
Yeah. So, well, specific with the anticoagulant trial, it really opened my eyes to what are the challenges from the patient's perspective, right? Of once they understand the disease, why they're on an anticoagulant, how do you manage bleeding, right? And what advice do you give to a patient who's having, say, recurrent epistaxis, you know, which is usually not serious, but is embarrassing, bleeding on the face, you know, patients really find that annoying. And what are things one can do to minimize that risk of bleeding? How important it is in these studies to study more than one dose. I mean, if there's any uncertainty, we're pushing companies to study 2 doses because you just don't know. Maybe the side effect profile will be better at a lower dose and you'll have roughly similar efficacy. And so things like that, I think, help me understand how to do better trials, but also help make me a better doctor when I'm talking to patients. Now I have in my mind, you know, steps one can take to reduce epistaxis on an anticoagulant. You know, that's important. Or in, say, the Improve It trial, where we had ezetimibe versus placebo, and you'd have people, you know, of course, confused. They think a lipid-lowering medicine, that's going to cause muscle aches or other symptoms or, you know, changes in their mental status that we now know aren't true and that don't exist with ezetimibe. I mean, that has to be one of the modern drugs with the least side effects I can think of that's effective. So some of these lessons from the trials also help me in my clinical practice. And so for lipid-lowering therapies, how do you approach a patient who has myalgias or other symptoms that are not likely related to the drug?
So it's interesting how your research career helps your clinical practice, but also your clinical practice informs your research questions. So I think that's an inspiration to all of us. Let me. Okay, go ahead.
It's about LDL. So what LDL levels do you think will be the task in the future? Can a person with a normal LDL around 100 take statin to further lower his or her cardiovascular risk, even if public health or the trials do not recommend it? as an individual, would you like to lose his risk to a minimum? To lower?
Yeah. So this is a good question, and this is something I deal with every Monday in clinic. One of the things that really has shaped my thinking about LDL is this concept of LDL years, right? We know about pack years of cigarette smoking, right? 2 packs per day for 10 years. We say that's, well, 2 times 10, 20 pack years. Maybe that's a similar exposure to 1 pack per day for 20 years. It's also 20 pack years, or a half a pack per year for 40 years. And really, LDL, one can make a similar analogy, and Helen Hobbs and the group down in Dallas have shown that it's not just what your LDL is right now today that predicts your risk, but what has it been over your entire lifetime? So why is it that patients with, say, heterozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, and here milligrams per deciliter, or okay, has, say, an LDL of 200 milligrams, why do they have their first MI at age 40 and not 20 and not 60, age 80? And they have shown that there's a threshold of about 8,000 milligrams per deciliter that on average predicts when a patient will have their first cardiac event, whether it's an MI or a stroke or need for PCI, stenting, etc. And that's just an average. And if you also smoke and have diabetes, maybe the threshold is 6,000. So maybe those are the patients we see occasionally with their first infarct in their 30s, right? And they have some bad habits. LDL is silent. You don't know until it causes an event. And then on the other hand, particularly women who follow a healthy lifestyle, their threshold might be 10,000 before their first event. So LDL of 100, a woman following a healthy lifestyle, maybe that's okay, because you would predict it would be age 100. So it's not only just the level, but it's where it's been over time, and the other risk factors that are important. I personally, when I'm talking to patients, I tell them this equation. Most of them don't want to have an MI until they're very late in life. And so 100 seems a reasonable goal for an otherwise healthy person, meaning they would get into their 80s or beyond. Because at birth, right, unless you have a genetic defect, our LDLs are 50 at birth, and they rise in the first few years and into the teen years. On the other hand, if we're seeing somebody who's age 60 and they're post-MI and their LDL had been 140, 150, well, they've already accrued all this LDL and damage, and then you need to really bring it down to show treatment effect. Our calcium CT scans for coronary artery calcium, are they done frequently here? Is that? Yeah. Also in the US. Yeah, exactly. Too frequently, right? Everybody having one. I'm seeing 2 patients, new patients on Monday. Both of them had CAC scores, and their internist didn't know what to do and are sending. I mean, that is atherosclerosis. It may be early, it may be mild, but they have the disease. We don't have an answer yet to what the target LDL should be, but I have advised even my family members, you have early atherosclerosis. These drugs are so safe. They're relatively inexpensive. Why would you want to have an LDL that has 3 numbers in it? I think you want to be in the double digits. We know that if you get to 70, you really arrest, for the most part, atherosclerosis if you can control other risk factors. And if you get below 55, you have a 95% chance of reversing the lipid plaque, so the soft plaque. So those are kind of the guideposts I use. I think everybody ought to be below 100. If you have atherosclerosis, I would target 70, because at least you know you're not progressing. Work on the other risk factors. And if you already have had an event and a disease, you want to be below 55 and well below that. And one of the papers that I wrote in the Lancet years ago from the Foyer trial showed that there's no floor, that patients who were below 30 had very good outcomes without more side effects. In fact, even below 20, we had 504 patients with single-digit LDLs. I think the median was 7, LDL of 7. they had the lowest event rate and no increase in side effects. Now, these are patients who have had established disease, so I don't think we all need to have an LDL of 7, but less than 70 sounds good.
Yeah, the nice thing here is that not only you're speculating about, this patient with subclinical atherosclerosis, should I lower the LDL more? You're also running the trial that will answer this question, Vesalius and others. So I think that's also a very good example of how the clinic informs the research and vice versa.
So I think November 8th will be a big day. That's when we're presenting the Vesalius.
I think we're approaching the end here. Let me ask you one question. You mentioned that the ENGAGE trial is nearing its 100th paper. So that's 100 papers from one single trial, which is a testament just as the quality and robustness of the data. But I also wanted to ask you about the importance of leading the next generation and having fellows running these analyses. So how do you see this, this bridge between the mentors, the fellows, and your experience first as a TIMI fellow yourself, then as a mentor, and having fellows from all over the world, including myself, and how does this dynamic grow?
Well, I think, this experience I had with this large trial, the ENGAGE AF TIMI 48 trial, well, first of all, I felt like the company and everybody worked very hard and spent a lot of money. And as Dr. Bronwell said, we collected lots of data. I mean, even data, and the company was very accepting of our recommendations that were beyond what's typically collected, doing serial electrocardiograms, echocardiograms, a long ECRF, blood work, various types of exploratory markers that I felt we kind of really owed it to them to try to take as much as we could out of that. Dr. Bronwell has this saying, it's like, when a trial is done, then you can start to feast on the animal, right? And he said, but here at TIMI, of course, we'll take the best parts of the animal first, and the meat, but then we're going to take everything. We're going to take the fat, everything, the nails, the hair. We're going to get everything we can out of that trial. And when you're down to the bone only, we're going to take the marrow out of the inside of the bones. It also helps that we still, now, 12 years after the end of the trial, have a monthly call where Dr. Bronwell will go through all the papers with us, and they'll say, Andre has been holding on to this paper for 1 month. Why can't he finish it? But honestly, to have that kind of organization and commitment has helped me leading the writing of the results in the secondary papers, so that every week, and I know you can attest to this, we send out emails saying, well, when do you think the next draft is? When can we review the data and pushing this along? I think it's great to be working with a large and diverse group around the world. I mean, it's a lot of fun for me. I think it helps a fellow's career and even into junior faculty to have this opportunity to write papers that are impactful. And so that's been a very rewarding part of my career. It's a lot of fun. But well, you have a perspective on this, Andre. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually very rewarding. It's very fun. I mean, I learned so much from my fellowship. I learned so much from you, not only the technical parts, but also the example. I mean, we would be there at TIMI until like 10 p.m., until one of our wives would call, and then both of us would go home. That would happen a lot. So you actually get the chance to learn by seeing people, having good examples, having good mentors, and building these long-standing relationships, which allowed Bob to be here today. It's a relationship of mentoring, but also friendship. And then you get to have this with several people all over the world. So I think that's very nice. I wanted to follow up with one thing. We actually have one slide which if you could project now, that is, I think it's a good time to show this. That is just showing the opportunities of fellowships, both the one I did in Boston and also fellowships we have here in our hospital. Here are the two programs. Just because I know some of you who may be interested in a career in research, I think these are two programs you should be aware. The one to the left is the Lehman Foundation Cardiovascular Research Fellowship. It's the one I did that allowed me to go to the Brigham to TIMI. This is Peter Libby's big picture. He was here last month in our other event. And this deadline is up to November 28th. So if anyone here is interested, please talk to us. We'd be happy to help. You could work with Bob over there in Boston for 2 years. And also we have our own fellowships here at Hospital Moinhos de Vento. We now have 3 fellowships in clinical research. We have one in clinical trials specifically and in our ARO with myself, and we have a small description down there. We also have a fellowship with Eduardo at our Clinical Research Institute and a fellowship with Cassia also at the Research Institute, but this is a multidisciplinary fellowship, not for physicians only. So I wanted to show this because I know there are people watching here, there are people watching online who may be interested in this path, both here in Brazil and in Boston. So I think you should be aware of these. This could be helpful.
I have an interesting statistic for you. I'm not sure you're aware, but we obviously are very close to our fellows even after they leave. What country has sent more fellows than any other country in the world to TIMI? Yeah, it's not like England, you might think. It's Brazil. And largely through the Lehman Fellowship. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're speaking Portuguese by this point?
No, but I enjoy the food.
Now we just want to say that Professor Juliano will be joining us at the Socergues, our local regional cardiology meeting that will be held in Gramado this weekend. So you're all welcome, todos convidados para aparecer lá na Socergues, and we'll have a symposium and probably Professor will be giving lectures about LDL cholesterol and other topics. So just thank you for being here and talking to us in this audience, but also invite everybody to go to Gramado. André.
Thank you.